Okay, welcome to this week's episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Dai-Shihan Miller here from Warrior Concepts here in East Central Pennsylvania. If you're nearby, hey, stop by and see us. Anyway, today's focus is going to be on Kata and a long-standing argument, right? We'll call it a heated discussion. How about that, right? So again, there's this long-standing disagreement. I'm going to just focus on the two extremes, right? Most people fall somewhere in the middle. Some people don't know at all, whatever. But what that really centers around is that kata don't work in a street fight, right, or in an attack. Okay, and on the surface, that sounds absolutely reasonable, right? Having been there myself, civilian law enforcement officer, that kind of thing, absolutely, right? Because no one attacks you with a scripted or a prearranged sequence of moves, right? So how can we even begin to think that we were going to do the same thing to anybody else, right? But here's the problem, right? The people who say that are often right, but for the wrong reason, right? And the people defending kata are often right. Again, depends on the argument, but they're often right, but again, for the wrong reason. Okay, so what's really going on here is that, again, from my observation and opinion, right, is that both sides are missing the actual point. Right? What's the point of kata, right? But before we dive in that, let's take a look at just summarizing the two extremes, right? So from the fighter mentality, right, what we get is you can't fight with choreography. That's not necessarily their words, right? But you can't use that to fight, right? Valid, absolutely valid, right? But incomplete, right? It's not the full story, right? What they end up missing is that kata were actually designed as training devices, okay? And they're there to develop things like structure, timing, perception, positioning, those kind of things, right? So for these folks, right, kata don't work. Okay, it's not the kata don't work, but you get the idea, right? Just kind of summarizing things up so people can see my chicken scratch while I'm writing, right? So the key thing here is that they reject the form mostly because they never learned what the form was teaching, right? The purpose of it, okay? And it could be for the same reason that a lot of us do or don't do what we do. It's because of who they bumped into or what they watched or whatever, okay? I've been a part of multi-style martial arts demonstrations. One was for a fundraiser a bunch of years ago. One of our local Taekwondo instructors got leukemia, right? So we contacted a bunch of schools, put together this giant fundraiser because we knew my wife at the time was a nurse, and we knew what kind of financial problems they're going to run into. So we put this big thing on, and so we're all at the mall, we're all taking turns getting on stage, and I'm looking around, and I see gangbangers, right? And I see like some people are obviously very animated about things like that shit, whatever. A couple other four-letter expletives, but somebody that if he wasn't the guy in charge, he was their warlord, and he just stood there, just watching and not moving, right? And if there was something that was demonstrated by somebody that his nothing but street experience told him was just shit, you could see the shift, right? So I leaned in and told one or two of my guys, right, just keep an eye out, right? These things are going on. And so we got up there and we were doing things, and I kept scanning because danger is where danger is, or could be, right? And what I saw were some of these guys, especially the one that I was pretty sure everybody else was going to take his lead, right? He was leaning in and watching with a critical eye, like, maybe I could use that. Right. And these are the people that we have to, I don't have to convince him to come into my school, but I have to convince him that maybe we're not just putting on white or black colored pajamas and a colored belt and running around like cosplay superheroes. Who knows? Anyway, right? But a lot of folks have never learned. And you know what? This goes for martial artists as well, right? They haven't learned what or why kata were developed, okay? Or what it's supposed to be teaching, okay? They think that the kata is the lesson, right? We'll talk about that here in a minute, okay? On the other extreme, right, we have the kata literalist, okay? And so to this person, right, this is the technique, but more than that, right, this is how things get done, right? To this person, this is the fight. Okay. Now, I'm betting that if you're watching this, you're probably not on either one of these extremes. Because if you're on this extreme, the word kata is showing up in the description, right? Or on the image that you're looking at, you'd have already blown it off. Okay. But the fact that you want to see what this guy maybe is freaking talking about, right? Maybe. Okay. And you're probably not here either. Okay. I'm just guessing, right? But most people are somewhere in between these two, right? They're not sure, or they're going along with things because they're trusting the teacher or they're trusting the process or whatever, okay? But anyway, right? So again, to the kata literalist, right? This is not just the technique, right? This is the way things are done, right? This is the way I'm going to fight, okay? The problem with this is that they end up over time, even if this were true, over time, it's been my experience, and this is not just in our martial art. You know, we've done parades around Halloween time and passed out thousands of guest passes to come in and whatnot, and I'll go to hand something to somebody, and they'll go, "Oh, I already have a black belt." Oh, okay, great. And every once in a while, we'll get into just a quick dialogue because, you know, we got to keep moving, right? But just this quick conversation, like, you know, I learned all this stuff, but knowing me, when stress hits, I don't even know how I'll even remember which one of those things to do. It speaks volumes, right? Okay. So what that really points to is that the more they learn, the more they get overwhelmed by options. So they do one of two things, right? They just keep learning, and then there's a lot of this doubt that creeps in where they're not sure how they're ever going to know under pressure what the hell, which one of these am I going to know to do, and hopefully I'll be right and whatever. Or they do what most people do, and they just throw most of it away, and they keep a favorite or three, and then they become predictable, right? That's a whole other lesson, right? So they either get overwhelmed, or what ends up happening is because they're trying to stick to the official way. Since are we allowed to do it this way? Are we right? Okay. And then what ends up happening is they get frozen in the decision-making process, right? Start to move to randori or sparring or whatever, right? And so the brain is just searching for the right technique, and they get stuck, right? Or everything just goes to shit, right? It just goes sideways, right? So these folks, right, they perform the kata, but they never learn how to use it as a tool, right? And unfortunately, it comes down to the instructor. And this is not a value judgment on anybody. It's not a judgment of any kind. It's just that if a teacher is focused on learn techniques, teach techniques, then students are going to learn techniques because that's all that are being taught, techniques, right? And they're sacrosanct, right? They're sacred, they're whatever, right? Okay. But then you have the opposite too, where you can't fight that way. So you just do it this other thing, right? And so what ends up with these folks is only the most intuitive or stubborn, right, stick with the progress or process because they have to figure out how to make up shit on the fly, right? And works for some, not for others. Works for some, not for It's the nature of things, right? Okay. But if we could figure out what these things are for and where the intent lies, and again, I only have a little bit of time, right? I know my invisible watch, right? A little bit of time to get these things across from kind of a big picture viewpoint. That's why it's important to have the right kind of teacher uh, covering things. Okay. And this is not about like coming to train with me or whatever, but this is what's necessary. I had to do it. My teacher had to do it. That's part of the tradition. Okay. All right. So let me do this to try to explain the kata thing a little bit better. Right. One of my teachers explained it kind of like this. I just ran with it as I explain things to students. Right. So think of kata as a delivery truck. Okay. You just bought some furniture, right? And it's in the showroom, right? Or it's at the warehouse. How's it getting to my house? Okay. Well, I either have to own a truck or I have to rent a truck or I have to call up my friend who now is sorry that he ever bought a pickup truck because everybody keeps asking him to borrow his truck or to help them move. You get the idea, right? Either way, or I pay them to deliver the furniture, right? Either way, right? Delivery truck shows up, and then what? Okay. We just stand in the driveway, truck door open, admiring our furniture? Or do we have the guy just drive through the front door and park that truck in whatever room the furniture is supposed to go in? And then, well, then what? Climb into the truck and enjoy the furniture? No, I mean, eventually the truck's going to leave, right? But no, we have to have this process of unloading the furniture, getting the furniture into the house, getting it to the room where it needs to go, and then spend some time adjusting that and getting it all set up. Some of the stuff might have to be put together, whatever, right? Getting it to go in that space so that it just becomes a part of the room. It's just, right? So then we just go through our day to day, right? Flopping down on the couch, hitting the clicker, whatever, right? We don't give any other thought to it, right? So what has got to stop being the point? Interesting, right? There's this whole process, okay? So the kata in this case, right? The kata is not the lesson. Okay? The kata is not the lesson, okay? The kata is the view, okay? Classically, kata were developed by teachers. A lot of people I have a lot of reference here in the Bujinkan. So there's a lot of folks that they throw words around like traditional, classical, right? I only wanted to do it the traditional way, right? Is that the way they did it traditionally? Or define what era we're talking about. What time frame? When you use the word traditional, do you mean all the way back to the original founder of the Togakure-ryu, Daisuke Nishina? What are we talking about? Okay, because a lot of the models, most of the models that I can think of at the moment in the Togakure school were created out of the principles and concepts of that school by Toda sensei to teach Takama sensei, my teacher, Hatsumi sensei's teacher, right? So we're only me, Hatsumi sensei, Takama sensei, shit. We're only three and a half generations back out of over 1,000 years. Okay. That's for a lot of people, that's like, let's see, me and then dad, then grandpa, and then great grandpa. Well, that's not very traditional. Okay. But the teacher creates this expedient so the student can learn the lessons that model was built from. Okay. So it's not the lesson, right? Hatsumi Sensei has said the technique is not the technique, right? People just nod. Yeah, technique is not the technique. Okay, the kata is not the lesson, right? It only points to where we need to begin, gives us a framework to work within, and then start to understand what's being conveyed. So eventually, we can do it for ourselves, right? One of the things I remind my students of on a regular basis is that I don't know how many people think about this, students or teachers. I think teachers at least should own this, right? And that is when students come in here, they are literally, it's not figuratively, they are literally putting their lives in my hands. Okay? They're trusting that what I am teaching them and how I'm guiding them into being able to do things will actually save their lives if they work the process and get those things integrated into their systems so they can do the same thing, right? They're putting their lives into my hands until a point comes where they can do it for themselves. Okay? This is not an ego trip. As one of my teachers used to say, it's not a badge of honor, right? This is a hell of a freaking responsibility. Right? Because if I screw up, give the wrong lessons to the wrong student or at the wrong time or whatever, it's like it's like handing a loaded gun to a baby, or it's like teaching somebody who's never going to be able to comprehend it, or it's giving these things to somebody who just wants to go hurt people. They've got some kind of a whatever they have. Okay, so we have to be careful, right? So it's not the lesson, it's the vehicle, right? The term I'm going to use is a delivery device, right? Just like the truck, okay? And just like the truck, after the kata get dropped off, or after the furniture get dropped off, right? What's the truck do? It leaves. Kata too, okay? But not in the way that most people think, because people like to throw around quotes online, right? Sensei said, and then some people grab that and take it as a shortcut. Well, shit, I'm going to throw it away anyway, or if I'm going to forget it, why bother learning it, right? Some people want to get past it as quickly as possible because they want to get on to the next thing. It's like being in an amusement park, okay? Get off one ride, oh, next, what do I ride again, okay? Again, this is what it is, right? So let's take a look at not just the kata is not the lesson, that kind of thing, right? But let's take a look at an evolution model. If you were on for Monday's Kuden, it was our 300th episode, okay? Which puts us in the 1 to 2% of all podcasts ever created and puts us into the less than 1% of any martial arts podcast ever created, okay? Not to say that it's a fantastic podcast. I think it is, but I'm biased, right? It's not about that, right? It's about never quitting, sticking to something, right? Anyway, the point of that, what we did during that episode was we looked at the evolution of not just the podcast, but how a student's training and their own proficiency and things like that have to evolve. So I thought, hey, today we'll talk about evolution, right? And the evolution model of kata, okay? So in stage one, right, what we're really looking at, we'll call this memorize. Okay? For those of you who are more tradition or classic oriented or whatever, right, then you know the shuhari, classical Japanese model for development of things. This is shu, right? But often people, they can memorize things, but they don't exactly know what's being conveyed, right? So here we memorize, right? What we're doing is we're answering the question, what? Right? What is this thing? What am I supposed to do, right? What do I do with my foot? What do I do with my lead hand? That kind of thing, right? Okay. So, but this phase is about copying movements, okay? The point of this shu phase, right? Shu literally means to copy or preserve, right? So the point is to duplicate your teacher's movement. Until you can do that, then we can't move on, okay? But it's copying movements. It's learning the sequence, right? It's also about building coordination, right? About just kind of getting a sense of, okay, when he comes and does this, right? At least in our system anyway, right? We don't engage in symmetrical warfare. What that means is we're not meeting the enemy head on. It's not this kind of thing. It's asymmetrical warfare. He comes in and we shift off angles, right? It changes things, okay? But either way, we learn about these things, okay? Necessary, but incomplete, okay? At this stage, the student is learning what to do. Okay, what to do. Right. Stage 2, what we might call the intermediate stage, right, is about understanding. Right. So, point here is to understand, right, the why. Why here it's what, right? Several Japanese teachers in Japan, they were senior teachers when I was coming up through the art. Now they're soke, right? But several of them, right? If you were learning a new kata and it was obvious you couldn't, whatever, right? And you said, well, why? Why do we do it this way? When would I ever use this? Da, da, da. They would go, it doesn't matter. You can't do it anyway. And it wasn't a challenge like you'll never be able to do it. It's you're putting the wrong question, or you're putting this question in the wrong order. Okay. The why never matters until you can actually do the thing. Right. Okay? If I don't, and that's good for anything, right? If I didn't know that there was a Russian language, I would have no why as to learn it. Okay. And learning it just because I know it exists, right? The what is there's a Russian language. Okay. But as soon as I start thinking about maybe traveling into certain areas of the world or getting into certain occupations or whatever, that might be a necessity. Now I have a why. Now I have a why, right? This should go for every part of our lives. But again, I'm just translating the makimono, right? The deeper scrolls from any lineage into the real world, right? About the kind of person we're becoming, where most people tend to just want to focus on the densho, just a list of techniques, right? Yeah, I'll just learn that and then I know the art. It doesn't work that way. Can you? Sure, you can do whatever you want. You're a grown-up. Okay? Anyway, so we memorize and then we work to understand, right? So at the understanding phase, again, why, right? Why movements work? Why this way? Okay? Why, or what does this do for me in the way of structure, balance, distance, right? Why? Why does this approach make his job harder and my job easier? Why does doing it this way simplify my options and my cognitive load, but increase his? Okay, that kind of thing, right? And at this stage, we're also working to understand the universal constant, which is cause and effect. Okay? I'm doing this thing because he's doing specifically that thing. Now, if we only ever do training at this level and the attack is always ski, I don't care if it's a grab, a punch, straight kick, or whatever, and we never shift into realms where the guy on the street might throw it a different way or whatever, or posture a different way or whatever, then yeah, we can stay here. Proficiency means look at me. Okay. But here, right, what's the reason why is my effect, right? Why is my angle what it is? Not the typical 45-degree naname that everybody thinks of as a default. Why would I go 90 degrees? Why would I go 270? What? Okay. Well, it's because of the angle of his attack. Right? It's because of his build. It's because of the environment that I'm in. Right? In Kotori, this is called kuraidori. Right? It's about these things. Okay. But if he throws that thing and I'm ignoring the cause, then me moving to a 45 naname like he's throwing a ski straight in, because that's all I know, moving to that's going to be the freaking cause of him wrecking that lead arm out of the way, because these postures don't work well against big old haymakers and stuff. It'll knock this thing out of the way, cause me to stumble. He's a monkey on my back. Everything changes, right? Okay. But the point here is that now at this stage, right, the student begins to understand why it works. Okay. We learn what to do, and then we learn why it works. Okay. The science behind it. Right. And then at stage 3, right, given that we understand this, we can start letting go of the handholds, right? Start playing around with randori, or randori more, because I start people here. Maybe even some sparring, that kind of thing. And then hopefully growing into sparring with people that fight differently. Okay, I know, scary. Other people, that's cool. I like to mix it up. Okay, well, mixing it up is not exactly the ninja way, but hey, whatever. Okay. But what we want to do is we want to express that understanding, right? I learn it, I understand why it works, and now I'm able to express that in anything. I could invent techniques or variations, not because I want to, but because those variations get created on the fly, adapting to what this person is doing, right? I'm expressing my understanding. This is the mechanics, right? Where the foot goes, where the hand goes, what the form looks like. Oh, the form has a name. Shit. Seion, Shiaku, Tangeki, whatever, right? Here, this is principles. Right? This is the why it works. Gravity, inertia, getting him to overcommit, balance, those kind of things, right? And then this is what I'm applying. Okay. So it doesn't matter what kamae, but it does. Because the kamae should match what he's doing to neutralize his ability to do what he does well. Okay. My angle doesn't matter, but it does. It matters because I need to neutralize the force of his incoming attack and be able to use his commitment to attack and turn that into an overcommitment that he didn't know was going to happen, right? That's the principles, okay? So as we get this, then naturally what ends up happening is we move into stage 3, which we're going to call express. And I don't mean to speed up like the express train, right? I mean, we are expressing through our actions, through everything that we do, our understanding of this thing. We're not stuck on models, right? We're understanding that, okay? So what we're doing here is understanding that one of the key principles is the ability to adapt, not to have fixed, preferred favorites, whatever, okay? To adapt, okay? So adapt what? Adapting under pressure, responding to what's actually happening. Not what we think is happening, not what we want to be happening, that's not what happens in the dojo, okay? We're no longer bound. We're no longer stuck. We're no longer fixed. We're no longer married, whatever word works for you, to the pattern, to the sequence, to the model, okay? To the model, right? Anyway, before I forget, I almost always do this, right? Before I forget, if you're getting value out of these things, if you're getting value out of this one, right? Help me help me game the algorithms on the different platforms, okay? Because it really is a game, right? They're computer programs. So if you like or share or leave comments or whatever, right? What you're programming the algorithm to do is to look at you. It already knows a lot about you. Don't worry about it, okay? To look at you and to know that this is important stuff, or it's stuff that people use, right? It's valuable content, right? And then they'll show it to other people like us that are interested in this topic as well. Right? I don't care if people that don't like it don't get it, right? But if you're doing yourself a favor, because it'll keep showing you more of our stuff, and you'll get bigger heads up right ahead of time. But also, you'll be helping other people that are serious about this level of training as well. So anyway, you don't have to do it now, but try to remember, okay? Anyway, all right. So this would be a good time to talk about 2 mistakes in this evolution process, okay? This evolution process, right? So mistake number 1 is throwing the kata away too soon, okay? Throwing the kata away too soon, okay? So here's where a lot of students kind of jump the track. It's where a lot of students go wrong, okay? Especially those coming from a more fight-oriented background, okay? Not necessarily, right? They might not have ever done any training at all, but they watch, ESPN fight stuff. They watch MMA fights. They watch organized competition kind of things, or they watch fight movies, those kind of things, okay? But either way, right? They hear this idea that the kata is not the fight, because it's not, right? It's not the fight. Okay. It's not only not the lesson, it's also not the fight, right? But what ends up happening is, student or not, right? They hear that the kata is not the fight, so they throw it away too early, or they hear one of these or see one of these quotes that keep floating around the internet. People keep passing it around like it's like hot potato or something like that, right? And Hatsumi Sensei said, "Throw the kata away. You don't need them. Throw the kata away. They're getting in your way." Okay. Well, Sensei said, yeah. Who'd he say it to? What was their rank? What was their level, right? Could it perhaps be that they were at this level or somewhere in here, and what was preventing them from actually evolving into that mastery level, right, was that they couldn't let go. They still were affixed to style, and it kept getting in their way. Maybe, okay? Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, okay? Before we pass on a quote from a teacher or a guru or a master or whatever, it'd be a really good idea if we knew that, one, that was not a generic thing to throw out, okay? Something general like love thy neighbor, okay? And two, it'd be a really good idea if we knew who they were talking to and something about that person, like their level or whatever, okay? Another example of that, over the years, there was an argument over Hatsumi Sensei telling people, you need to take smaller steps. And there was an argument with a whole other group that was like, he said, take bigger steps, okay? Yeah. He was telling the people who were taking fucking steps that were too big to take smaller steps. And people that were taking steps that were too small and they weren't using space properly, he told them to take bigger steps. But these two groups are fucking arguing over what Sensei told them individually to fix their own shit. And they were trying to fix everybody else from a level of not understanding. Okay. So we have to be careful. Okay. Lessons are not always complete either, right? Half the work is in us actually discovering the answer, because they sink in, they stick better. Okay. But either way, right? They hear that the kata is not to fight in one way or the other, or to drop the kata or whatever, and then they throw it away too early, right? And that's the mistake. Okay, that's the mistake, right? Kata at this level are expert models. Okay, they're showing you, if you want to move, if you want to defend, those kind of things, right? Like an expert, then an expert in this system would do it like this. Okay, it's a place to start. You want to be an expert, then model an expert. Okay, there's certain things, even in business or in, like, with my consulting business and things like that, right? There were certain things that I wasn't all that great at, but I saw a mentor that was like, oh, they could do it 10, 100 times better, right? I want to have that skill. So I'm not just going to have him talk to me and then I'm going to go figure it out for myself. I'm going to figure out whatever it takes to hang out with that person as much as possible. And I have, right? Doing menial labor for all kinds of stuff, right? So I'm going to be close enough so I can watch them and see them, and I can mirror, I can model how they do it. If I want to be an expert, or if I want to be an expert in that realm, then I'm not just going to learn from anybody who has a couple of tricks that they can show me, right? I want to model somebody that's an expert at that thing. And that's what kata are in the beginning, right? They're showing you, you want to be an expert? Then here's how an expert in this system would do it. Okay. But you don't abandon the model, right? You don't abandon the model until you understand what the model is showing you. Like I said, 3 generations back, right? My teacher, his teacher made up models from nothing but pure principle so that he could learn quicker. Learn these, then we can dissect them so you can understand what's going on, okay? So the key thing here is that rejecting kata too early, right, is like rejecting instruction before you've ever learned the lesson. And people do that all the time, right? We see it in comments under videos and stuff. That shit would never work, right? One of my favorite comments in the 0.01% of time that I ever waste my time getting into a conversation with somebody who doesn't want to learn anything, right, is to say, I'm sorry that that didn't work out well for you when you tried to apply it. So that's a locator statement, right? What it does is it elicits them to tell me where they really are. Okay. Yeah, I tried it and that shit sucks. So I went and did XYZ go. Okay. But most of the time they don't say that. What they say is, I would never even try to do that shit. See, that person has rejected the instruction, rejected the lesson before they even saw it. Karma's a bitch. Okay. Cause and effect happens all the time. Okay. Anyway, mistake number 2. Okay. Mistake number 2 is thinking that you're beyond the kata. Well, I'm at this rank. I'm at this level. I know that kata, right? I've done that 50 times. I've done it 500 times, whatever, right? I can do that one in my sleep. Okay. So Sensei said I should throw it away. Okay. Maybe a better term instead of throwing away or forgetting. Hatsumi Sensei said, forget the kata. Okay. My question to people is, one, on the people who never learned it, how do you forget something you don't know? And 2, how do you forget something that is so part of who you are? And especially as a teacher, right? It's not about forgetting, it's about loosening the grip on, right? Stop letting it be an anchor. Okay. So this one's for the advanced students, right? The opposite mistake of dropping the kata too soon, right, is to me, it's just as dangerous, right? And this one shows up in more experienced practitioners more often than you might think, okay? And here's the thing. As proficiency increases, students begin to feel like they've moved beyond the kata, right? I know it, right? I don't need that anymore, right? And in one sense, that's true, right? I'm not arguing that point, okay? But in another sense, it's exactly where problems begin to creep in, okay? So here's a different perspective. Kata are not just a starting point. They can also be a reference point. They can be something to return to help maybe fix mistakes or to re-examine, re-explore, to see if maybe we didn't miss something, okay? Students are surprised very often when they find out that I have read and reread my teacher's books, other past teachers' books or other things, dozens of times. Well, you already read the book. Like, you already know what it says. Do I? Right? I know the language and I read it. Right? But have you ever gone back and reread something or watched your teacher demonstrate a technique that you thought you knew, and all of a sudden, like they're doing it the exact same way, but you see something you somehow missed before? That's why we do it. Okay? So it's a reference point, right? Even at advanced levels, right? Even at advanced levels, kata become they become diagnostic tools, right? They become bad habit breakers or bad habit detectors. Okay. Again, you may not need kata to perform, like in a sparring thing or whatever, right? But you will always need the kata to refine. Okay. So here's a story, personal, right? Many moons ago, won't talk about this. Okay? I've been around the sun more times than I can believe myself. But anyway, I was a Shodan working on. I had an upcoming test for Nidan, and I know that's an alien concept for a lot of people in this art because they were promoted subjectively and not based on objective standards. Where if you didn't meet the standards, you didn't move on, right? But I had this test that was coming up, and I was working on my Nidan kata. Now, in my teacher's curriculum, and therefore it's in our curriculum, there are no such thing as Nidan kata. There are kata that allow you to learn the principles and concepts that are the next step, right? And then allow the teacher to evaluate whether or not you have those. Okay. So we have them, but in the curriculum it says, while there are kata that are considered to be nidan kata, knowing the kata are not enough, right? The student must be able to display timing, distancing, angling, flow based on whatever the attacker throws. Now it doesn't say not what I think he's going to throw. Okay. So very often when somebody's coming up on that rank, and I'm start to evaluate him, even before test day, I'll have a senior in class and I'll conspire with them and I'll just go, hey, I'm looking at them for rank. Can you work with them every once in a while in class? And somewhere in the practice, throw the wrong attack. How else will I see if they're actually paying attention to what's happening or they're just paying attention to what they expect is going to happen? Okay. Of course, they're not going to be able to finish the technique that they're working on or demonstrated. They're going to have to adapt to what's actually happening. But if they shut down, maybe we need to reevaluate whether or not they're actually ready for that next move. Okay? I know, sounds unfair. How else am I supposed to test them? Okay? Anyway, so I was working on these things, and the kata kept getting jammed up. The same pieces kept breaking. What I mean by that is I hit a certain point and I would have to adapt or I would have to change or whatever. Well, yeah, since that's part of the training. Not when I'm working on kata proficiency, because my skill set is supposed to be that I can do each move in a way that naturally makes the next move in the kata that the kata points to inevitable. It's right there, okay? But if my timing, distancing, angling, whatever is off, then no, I won't be set up for it. Or when I move in to try to take it or what, right? So I'm struggling with this stuff. And then finally what I decided was I heard the words of my teacher in my ears, right? That, you need to revisit basics. You need to go back and look at things. So I decided to go all the way back, start with Sanshin, do some Kyonapo, work lower level rank techniques and whatnot, because I was trying to figure out what was broken. And it's not broken at Nidan. I'll talk about this in a minute. It's not broken at Nidan. It was broken early on. And I'll talk about the testing process here in a minute, right? But we have to understand that I had to understand that when I learned those things and I got the okay to go on to the next level, okay, that okay didn't mean that I was a master at it. It meant that I was proficient enough at that level with that skill to move on. But the reality is that I had only been in training for what? A couple of weeks, couple of months, year, whatever, right? My body lacked a certain level of coordination at that point. There were workarounds, all kinds of things, right? And I had a limited knowledge and level of understanding about just a tiny handful of principles, concepts, whatever. Okay? Here I was several years later, still doing things based on the belief that I had that. Well, when I went back, I went back with like how many other levels worth of principles, lessons, all that kind of stuff that went back, right? I was going to look at that, just like when I reread a book, things pop out, right? Shit, fix this, right? And then turn around and go back and revisit my Nidan Kata right through, like a problem never existed. Okay? So that's another sticking point with people where they think that the kata that they got at white belt, right, are beginner kata and they're now beyond those. No, they're just techniques. Right? A white belt's going to do his techniques a certain way because of coordination and timing and understanding and whatnot, right? But a Shodan's going to do it differently. A Nidan's going to do it differently. A Tentan's going to do it differently. Right? Because they know more. They're looking for more. They can feel more. They can sense more. Right? It's not the same. So anyway, instead of just repeating it or what, there was part of me that I have to acknowledge there was a part of me that thought I was beyond because they were like my lower level stuff. They were beginner to no, they're just techniques, right? But there's a reason that they're called fundamentals, right? Basics is a really shitty word. It's a bad translation into English, right? Because we think basics means beginner. But see, fundamentals, foundational techniques, what we're talking about are movements, angles, those kind of things that show up again and again and again and again in kata across the system. So we have to know them. They're like the bricks in the wall that we're building. But if we've got shoddy bricks, that wall's not going to support very much weight before those shitty bricks start breaking down and everything collapses. Okay. So here's the thing, right? I kept working on those things and it didn't fix anything. So when I went back, right? Yeah. So what I ended up finding was that the problem wasn't in the Nidan Kata, right? The problem was in what came before it, the stuff I took for granted, right? Timing, distancing, angling, all that kind of stuff, right? The stuff I thought I had, right? So once I corrected those, everything got fixed, right? So here's the big lesson that I pulled out of that. The lesson was the kata didn't fail me. It revealed where I had weak points, where I had problems, okay? So the kata, do I have that on here anywhere? Maybe not, right? Yeah, I don't have any place to write it either. So the kata didn't fail me, right? The breakdown in my problem to do things, and what a lot of people will do is the technique's not working, so they'll come up with their own little alternative and go, well, see, I do it this way. Yeah, but can you do the original? Well, it just doesn't work for me, so I do it this way. No, the kata is thousands of years old or hundreds of years old. It's always fucking worked. So if I always have to do henka, then I can't do the kata. That's the answer, right? There's something off with my skill set or understanding, okay? So the breakdown in the kata wasn't the problem, right? The breakdown in the kata was a diagnosis. Some of your basics are shite. And until I fix them, nothing changed. When I fixed them, all the problems went away. Okay. So let's see. Somehow I think I duplicated things, right? So let's take a look at some do's and don'ts here to kind of wrap things up. What do we have here? Don't throw things away too soon. Like 15 pages of notes. So, all right. So, okay, I already talked about the test stuff, right? Think about this if you are testing based on standards, right? Whatever level you're at, that yay or nay is based on where you're supposed to be at that level. It's not a decree of mastery. Okay. So instead of thinking about a pass during a test as being, a stamp of approval that you never have to work on that thing again, you've got it. We need to recognize that I'm always building, right? Dai-Shihan, I still go back and review Kyonopo, Sanshin, that kind of thing, not just to go through the motions, right? What is it telling me now? What is it telling me now at 63, right? With bad hips, back problems, knee problems, right? And how do I need to adjust so that the principles will still come out of this body? Okay? Because I'm not going to be ever able to do it again like I could when I was 25. I know that contradicts a lot of people's belief systems, but it's okay, right? So again, we've trained more, all that kind of stuff, right? So this is where, when we go back and take a look, we revisit those techniques, right? We're not going back and looking at them like a beginner. Okay? We're going back, we're taking everything that we've learned since passing that test and never doing that technique again, or always doing it the same way, because the only time we ever do it is because we're a teacher and we're teaching it to that level of people in our group, in our school, whatever. And so it's always being done the same way at that level. I'm talking about for my own stuff when I go back and revisit, when we go back and revisit, right? We need to be exploring, right? But we're taking back how many more weeks, months, years, or whatever of lessons, of principles, of whatnot that need to be inserted into that technique that new guy or new girl didn't know anything about. Okay. So, because again, by now you train more, right? You got more principles, you got all this stuff, right? Your body moves better, your coordination is different, all that stuff. Okay. So, every time you go back to a foundational technique, right, you should be upgrading it. Okay. Should be upgrading it, right? So, quickly, let's define upgrade, right? Before somebody takes it and runs with it like, well, I just do whatever I want. Okay. Not repeating it. Okay. Upgrading it. Okay. Better timing, right? Can we change the timing? Slower, faster, whatever. Distance equals time. So if I change distance, that changes timing. How does that affect him more? How does it affect him less, right? Shrey Sensei, one of the master teachers, is always focusing on balance, right? So his big thing is you learn a technique, and you're really, really good at it, and then you try different timing, or you try a different angle, or you try a different distance, right? Does that make it better? Does it make it worse? Does it stay the same? If it stays the same or gets better, I'm going to hold on to this, right? It's still kind of an option, right? If it gets better, definitely going to make that change. Then I'm going to change some other element in that technique, right? Does it get better? Stay the same? Does it get worse? Worse always gets rejected, right? It's a processing thing, right? Better structure, better angling, better perception, better decision making, all that kind of stuff, right? Everything changes, right? But if your technique stays the same, if it still looks the same as it did, I don't know, 2 years ago, right? Then training and skill proficiency has not evolved. We plateaued. Okay. Now, as long as ego convinces us that that's mastery and that's all I need, I'm not here to tell you to do anything different. Okay. But I will remind you of things that Hatsumi Sensei and other teachers have said, which is there's no end to the path. Okay. There's always a better way. There's always a smoother way. There's always a more sneaky way. Okay. So this is why we return to kata, right? Not to relearn it, right? But to see what we missed the first time around. I mean, if I only had 6 weeks or 6 months in training, then I only have 6 weeks of working with the moves and trying to get them integrated in my body. I only have 6 weeks of understanding. I only have 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever. Okay. So when we go back, right, we want to see what we missed, right? Because the technique doesn't get deeper. The technique's always been deeper. Okay. The technique doesn't get deeper. We do. And that's the whole point of the Okuden level of training. People tend to translate Shoden, Chuden, Okuden. Shoden is a beginner level, and Chuden is middle level, and Okuden is high level. That's not what it said. Shoden, kanji, is high level. Critical lessons that must be learned. Chuden, middle level, but it's actually flipping it to be able to do those principles and concepts at a different distance, at a different time, at a different, right? And then Okuden, Oku doesn't mean high, doesn't mean advanced, doesn't mean secret. Oku means deep. Okay? It means looking for the things and ferreting out the shit that will get in your way. Okay? So this is the real evolution of training, right? Not adding more techniques, okay? But deepening the ones you already have, okay? And so if we looked at these things, what we can see is beginners or the beginner mind, and Hatsumi Sensei was very, very clear about this up through the years, right? When he said beginners, or he was talking about beginner mind, he wasn't talking about new people in the art. Might be, but he was talking to anybody who was still thinking. And this isn't like Shoshin, that kind of beginner mind where you're looking at things fresh, like you've never seen it before. That's not the same thing. When he was talking about the beginner or the beginner mind, he was very clear about saying, I don't care what belt color you have around your waist. If you're still thinking and operating like a beginner, like someone stuck on that kind of, then I don't care what your rank is. Okay. So when I use the word beginners here, this is what I mean. Beginners collect techniques or variations or whatever. Okay. Advanced practitioners refine them. Masters return to them. Okay. You can return to something without being attached to it. Okay. My wife and I like to visit Cozumel or Puerto Maya and things like that in Mexico. No plans to live there, but we like to return there because there's certain elements and certain feels and vibes and stuff, that kind of thing, right? So anyway, right? So, but here's the thing, and this probably isn't going to land on anybody that's watching because you guys are already enlightened. You're just kind of checking in to, I don't know, skip around work for the day or whatever. Okay. Most students in the martial arts, not just in ours, most students in the martial arts never leave stage one. They never leave that because that's the easiest thing to focus on, right? There's comfort in repetition. Okay. There's comfort in things not changing. Okay. There's at this level, there's this fear of making mistakes, of doing it the wrong way, of not sticking to the style, that kind of thing, right? And there's this attachment to doing it right. Okay, so the trap, right, is performance mode. Okay, trying to look correct, trying to remember steps, trying to replicate exactly, comparing my model to other people, right? That kind of thing, right? Nagata Sensei one year in Japan was talking about this very thing. He said, he was naming a given kata, and I can't remember the one. He goes, he was demonstrating it. We were working on it in class. He goes, I do it this way, but Seno Sensei does it a little differently, and Oguri Sensei did it differently, and this teacher does it differently, and Soke's never said anything about that. So I think that it's probably okay, because Soke would very quickly correct someone. Right? If the teacher doesn't correct, they're leaving you to your own devices for one of many reasons. Okay. So performance mode feels like progress because we just got better at the choreography, right? But it quietly, subtly, unknowingly, right, blocks real growth. Okay? Because the only constant in the universe is change. And if we're not changing and growing and adapting, then we're stagnating, rotting, or dying. And that's just life. That's not just martial arts, that's life. Okay. So the missing shift, right? The goal is not to perform the kata. Right. In the beginning, we're trying to learn it so we can remember the moves, and then we don't have to worry about the moves. I don't have to worry about where my foot goes in Ichimonji. I don't have to worry about how Uke Nagashi is done, whatever. Right. Then I can start exploring. Right. What does this angle do? Why does that catch him? Why does moving later than sooner, right, catch him more? Right. All those kind of things. Right. It feels like progress, but it's not. Okay. So again, the goal is not to perform the kata. Right? The goal is to become aware of what the kata is teaching. It's that delivery truck. Okay. So again, we've got things in there like uke, right? The receiving aspect of it, right? The kankaku, right? Feeling, right? Tactile feel, those kind of things, right? What can we learn from that? Perception before the action actually starts. People just generally get with a partner or they get their distance, and then they start thinking about, okay, I have to throw this kind of punch, and the other guy's thinking, okay, when he throws the punch, I'm going, right? But they're not watching their partner move up. They're not watching their partner move into positions. They're not watching gaps. They're not watching weight shift to see how this person has to move to launch that thing, right? That's the depth, okay? That's the depth, okay? So let's bring this home, right? In a real situation, right? Let's just come back to that. there is no kata, right? There's no sequence, there's no guarantee, right? What you have is your ability to perceive, it's your ability to adapt, and it's your ability to act at the right moment, right? But if your training never leaves form, it will fail you when the form disappears. As soon as this guy does something that is not expected, right, everything falls apart. Okay, so very, very quickly on our corrections thing here. So we're going to do's and don'ts, right? So we're not going to get stuck on form. All right. So let's see. Not going to get stuck on form, but we're also not going to throw it away too soon either. Too soon. And we're also not going to do what? We're also not going to ignore it, right? We're not going to think it's beneath us, that kind of thing, right? We are going to use kata as diagnostic tools, right? We're going to use it as mistake identifiers. Right? Again, the kata are hundreds of years old. Right? The principles are timeless. Right? They've always worked. So if I can't make it work, it's not the kata. It's me. Okay? And they're bad habit. We're going to use them as bad habit breakers. We're going to stop relying on Henka and variations to save us. Yes, we want that skill, but we also want the skill. Here's a skill that Hatsumi Sensei and many teachers pointed out. Because of the nature of our art, now if you're in some other art or whatever, if it's as adaptable as this, fantastic. If not, I might ruffle some feathers. I don't mean to, but this art, because of the process and how it moves to adaptation, we should be able to go into any martial art, or I don't know, look at videos online or whatever, right? And get 90%, at least 90% of the base movement correct right out of the gate. We might need some refinements and whatnot because they create dynamics or dynamic pressure, force, power, whatever differently, or there's little nuances and whatnot, right? But we should be 90% there. But if we're fixed on a set way of doing things, and we've seen this in the past, people from other arts that are very, very fixed, they're very tense, or there's very specific motor things that are right, they're very stylized, that kind of thing, right? They have a much harder time adapting to asymmetrical warfare and these different things than somebody who has the principles and concepts and can very quickly pick up on things, or look at other martial arts and instead of condemning them, go, oh, look at that. I can use that. We would do it slightly this way, but that's usable. Okay. So again, remember that what you have in the moment that something bad is happening, right, is you have your ability to perceive. Hopefully that's been trained, right? You have your ability to adapt. Hopefully that's been trained. And you have your ability to act at the right moment. All of those things are taught in kata. But most people only focus on what? Where the foot goes, where the hand goes, what hit, what strike, where, when. Okay. So again, if training never leaves the form, then it fails when form disappears. Okay. So the real question becomes, how do you train this shift? Right? Because the scrolls don't say anything about that. Okay. There's list of kata, which are places to begin applying the principles and concepts that are not listed on the Densho. They're listed over on the Makimono. And they're passed on via Kuden, teacher to student, that kind of thing, right? Through the initiation process. How do you start? Okay. Well, we do it in these Friday master classes, right? Kuden sets up the big picture kind of thing. Whiteboard Wednesday, here's the strategy and tactics and whatnot. And then the Friday master class puts them into action, right? So this Friday, we're going to take this idea out of theory, right? and put it into your body. Okay. So what's going to happen on Friday is whether you're here for a live class or you're in for Zoom, um, and, uh, and doing it, from your home, right? Is you're going to end up experiencing what happens when the expected outcome disappears, right? Now, if you have a training partner, if you're doing it long distance from Zoom, or you just join the class or get the recording or whatever, and then put it into your training group, right? So you'll need a training partner for some of these things, right? You'll experience how to read what's actually happening instead of guessing or assuming, right? And how to adapt in real time without relying on memorized sequences. But we're also going to bring that back to, see how that kata shows that? See how that kata shows that? Okay. So the reason we need to get that and have that come full circle is because that's where kata finally become useful, right? Not when you can perform it perfectly, right? But when you no longer need it, right? Not talking about it, it's not useful, so these guys never even bother, right? But it's not an idol to be worshipped, okay? It's to be respected as the tool that it is, because it's like pirate's treasure. Here's a chest, and when I open this thing up, look at all the cool stuff. Okay, there's just loads and loads of lessons in every kata. Okay, so let's summarize this up very, very quickly here. Okay, very quickly. Just based on what I've covered here in the last hour and almost 15 minutes. Okay, one, kata is not the lesson. It's the vehicle that is carrying a lot of lessons. Okay. Two, memorize, understand, express. That's the evolution, right? We learn it, we learn the what, then we explore why that works, right? So that we can adapt those principles. What one of my teachers used to say all the time was that when the shit hits the fan, when things go sideways, right? You're applying the principles correctly. Kata build themselves, right? Those new things that you might take back to your class and go, hey, let's. I've done that based on things that happened when I was a military cop and whatnot, and then gone back and explored that because this guy with big arms just hammering in, hiding behind Hoko, and then just waiting for that feel where, oh, there's a mushadori, or there's an onukadaki, or there's a, okay, with no intent on doing anything other than not getting my skull crushed by this guy with jackhammer hands. Okay. What else? Performance is not proficiency. Okay. No matter how good you can do the techniques. That's since they said that as well. No matter how many techniques you know, no matter how well you can perform them, you've got to talk to people who have real world experience, because they're going to tell you, whether they know the kata or not, they're going to tell you how you better be training to be able to deal with that scenario. Okay. The kata is a starting point. Okay. These people who reject it have to depend on intuitive reasoning and maybe some coaching from somebody, right? Again, they have to have a high degree of intuitiveness, or they're just, the body and the brain are just willing to take a whole bunch of shots until they figure it out. You know what I'm saying? Right? Not knocking them. Right? That's important, right? You need to be able to take shots. Okay. And these folks here, they're not wrong in that kata are important. They just think that they're going to be able to fight that way, and that's not going to go well. Okay. Let's see. Number 4, if you need the sequence, you don't yet own the skill. Okay. If you need to think about where your foot goes, you need to think about where your hand goes. If you need to think about what the next move is, whatever, then something's not on. Okay. And even when the kata stops being the point, okay, when the form disappears, the principle still remains. Okay. We're not, if something goes sideways, we're not falling back on tic-tac-toe or high school wrestling or whatever. Okay. When something goes sideways, we know why, and we adapt positioning, right? Adjust to distance, change the angling. Cool thing about the system, if you're in the Bujinkan, one of the coolest things I think that is there for anyone who's gotten past the hybrid nature of Bujinkan training, where people aren't specializing or looking at the specifics of each lineage, right? It's just, I do Bujinkan, okay? Nothing wrong with that. However, each lineage has a very specific way of handling incoming attacks. Some circular or orbiting, some linear, some are, anyway, right? And so most people are really good at doing things a way. They've chosen favorites. Some people might be good at a backup, right? Some, I'm talking less than 10%, okay? 1 to 2% may have a third backup, but either way, the second or third backup is not as good as their primary. Either way, right? But they can change, okay? We have 9 schools. Just that he had Soke ship over, okay? Let's not talk about all the ones that had Menko Kaiden in that is a part of Bujinkan training, okay? But if I understand the approaches, then if something's not working, when I change, I'm not changing to some other martial art. I'm changing strategic approach, changing how the principles get prioritized and show up. Am I using close range distance, long range distance, and my profile, right? That kind of thing. And so when you really get this, then you understand that we have the ability to change 8 times, given that we only count the lineages that had Soke ship. So you're starting with something and you have the ability to shift and change. So anyway, we'll go from there. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I will talk to everybody again next time. Hopefully I'll see you for the Fridays class. And if not, I'll see you next week for Whiteboards Wednesday. Be safe, train hard.